And this week's reading from Rays of the One Light, weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. How should we meet our tests? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. Last week, we considered Satan's temptation of Jesus in the wilderness after his baptism by John. We discussed the question, does Satan exist? All of us experience temptation of one kind or another in our lives, some of us frequently, others only occasionally. Whether temptation comes to us from our own subconscious or from outside of ourselves is secondary to the fact that it does come and that we must deal with it. More important then is the question how to deal with it. In fact, how to deal with tests of any kind. Martin Luther flung an inkpot at the devil who had appeared to test him. A dark stain on Luther's cell is pointed out to tourists in support of this story. Unfortunately, our trials are not often so summarily dismissed. A fellow monk speaking once to Swami Kriyananda said of Satan, "If I could only get my hands on him." Jesus overcame his temptations in the wilderness. Jesus, during his temptations in the wilderness, overcame them and thereby set an example for all time by clinging the more determinedly to God. As Paramhansa Yogananda used to say, darkness cannot be driven out of a room with a stick. Once you turn on the light, however, the darkness will vanish as though it had never been. Jesus manifested this principle. The Bible tells us, therefore, that at last the devil leaveth him, and behold, angels came and ministered unto him. In the Bhagavad Gita, the point is clarified further by the added explanation that there are three qualities in human nature: sattvic, or spiritually elevating; rajasic, or ego activating; and tamasik, or spiritually darkening. It is this triune aspect of human nature that the third chapter refers to with the words, "As fire is hidden by smoke, as a mirror is dulled by rust, and as an embryo is enclosed in the womb, so is the indwelling spirit enveloped by desire." Yogananda explained that each of these examples describes one of the qualities or gunas. Sattva guna, that which elevates our consciousness, can be freed of any identity with ego by a little puff of meditation and right affirmation. Rajoguna, which embroils the ego in restless activity, can be worked off with a little more and a little longer effort. Tamoguna, embracing as it does such mental states as laziness and stupidity, can only be outgrown in time, since it inhibits even the desire for self-improvement. The example Jesus gave us was intended more for those in whom sattva guna is predominant. But if you yourself find elements in your consciousness that resist even the effort to cling to God in prayer and meditation, don't despair. Patience, as it has been well said, is the fastest path to God. As long as your efforts take you steadfastly in the right direction, you will come out right in time. Remember Yogananda's words, "A saint is a sinner who never gave up." If, however, your nature impels you, even against your will, to move in the wrong direction, toward egoic desires and away from God, strive at least to detach yourself mentally from your wrong actions, which are induced by habit. The time will come when their own stored-up energy will tire and diminish. At that time, if you have not contributed to that energy by your consenting will, you will find it possible at last to redirect your energies more constructively. Thus, through Holy Scripture, has God spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. When I gave service last time, there was a question about why was I wearing a mask, and I'm going to wear my mask throughout the service today. And I will say that because I work in healthcare, because I'm more likely to be an asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic carrier than our other ministers, I'm going to wear my mask, to paraphrase Pope Francis, as an act of love to all of you. Also, even if I were to get a very mild case of COVID, despite being vaccinated, I'd be out of work for a minimum of 10 days. And we're understaffed enough as it is at the hospital, so they don't need that. And finally, you may not realize it, but balancing a mask, a microphone, and a pair of glasses on your ears and taking them on and off is just a pain. And that's one test I don't want to deal with during Sunday service. So, but seriously though, the question that we've been asked to consider this week, how should we meet our tests, is a very important one, particularly for us as devotees. And I know that many people in our Sangha right now are experiencing tests and challenges. And so I think this is really good for us to consider. And, sometimes when people start meditating and they start to develop spiritually, they think that their lives are going to get easier. And that is not necessarily the case. Sometimes when we've been on a spiritual path for a while and we face a very large test in our lives, sometimes we're called to question and doubt our own sort of worthiness as disciples, and that maybe we're not good enough. And that also is wrong thinking and not the case. Tests and trials are bound to come to us on the spiritual path, whether those are tests from a satanic force, whether those are our own karma coming up that we have to deal with from the past, or whether that's just Divine Mother testing us to see, do we really love her more than anything else in this world? And the fact that Jesus and all of the great saints had tests and trials that they had to face, very challenging ones often, should not cause us to despair, but give us hope, because if they could overcome those things, we can too. And so, as our reading says, the question is not if we're going to have challenges, but how should we face those? How should we meet those when they come? And in our reading today, Swami Kriyananda gives us 3 really important keys to this question. And I'm going to start with the first 2, which are energy and alertness. And those are very closely linked. And a couple of weeks ago, Brian, thank you, talked a bit about the 3 gunas. And understanding these are really helpful for understanding how to approach our tests. So, tamoguna, this spiritually darkening, this energy, this quality that sort of pulls our energy down. We have rajaguna, which is this outward directed, restless energy. And then we have sattvaguna, this uplifted, spiritually uplifting energy. And we can use these 3 different energies in dealing with our tests. So the Tamoguna approach to dealing with our tests is a passive approach. Oh, I have this challenge in life. Let me drink so I don't have to look at it. Or, let me take this drug, or let me do this so I don't have to face it. And that dulls our awareness, our alertness, right? And oftentimes, people engage in these behaviors out of a belief that it's going to sort of make them happier. There's a certain comfort, a certain familiarity before, because waking up and facing that reality is just too much pain. Then there's sort of the next little step up, which is sort of a combination of the Tamasik and Rajarajaguna qualities, Rajaguna, right? And in this approach, it's sort of like, all right, well, let me just continue to do my own thing and ignore this person or this situation over here, which is causing me problems. And maybe if I just keep doing this long enough, that'll go away. Right? Maybe if I just keep doing my own thing, like I won't have to face the fact that global warming is real and change my life, right? Or whatever it happens to be. Yesterday, Alan asked me what the topic for Sunday service was going to be today, and I told him how should we meet our tests, and he shared with me a line from Linus from the Peanuts, which I thought was just really sort of spot on for the Tamo Rajo approach. Linus said, "No problem is so big or so complicated that it can't be run away from." Right? And I will say, I can think of maybe one example where this approach is a good one. And that is if you are in northern Maine and you have a moose running after you, you want to run. Because once you get out of that moose's territory, the moose will leave you alone. But for most of our problems in life, that's not particularly helpful, at least in the long run. All right, then the next step up, the Rajaguna approach to dealing with our challenges. And that is just to sort of like put out a lot of energy and do a whole bunch of different things in the hope that one of these things is actually going to do something and magically everything's going to be okay. Or the other sort of aspect of the Rajaguna approach is, all right, well, let me do A, B, C, D, and E, and if I check off all the boxes, I don't have to think too hard, but at least I've put out some energy and something's going to magically sort of work out. Then there's the Rajasattva approach, and this is where we're all at as devotees, at least most of the time. And, don't get me wrong, we all have these other sort of aspects in our consciousness. We've all, just wanted to tune out or spun our wheels at times. But this is sort of where we're at most of the time. And in the Rajasattva approach, we are putting out energy, but it's a more focused energy. It's got some direction and some intention behind it. We've actually given it some thought. And the more direction and intention we put behind it, the more focused that energy is, and the more likely we are to actually succeed in what we want to do. And this is what it takes to be successful in the world. Whether you're a devotee or not, you need to be able to put out focused energy to be successful. And as that energy becomes more uplifted, more directed towards helping others, towards doing good in the world, as it becomes more directed inward and upward as opposed to just outward in the world, the more sattvic that energy becomes. And the more clarified our awareness. And we progressively become, particularly as we direct that energy inward and upward as opposed to solely outward, the more alert and aware and awake we become, until finally we become awake in God. Now, we don't get to the purely sattvic state until we have mastered the material plane, until we have mastered the ego and become fully awake in God. We're not free of the necessity of having to put out energy into the physical world until we get to that state. Krishna tells Arjuna in chapter 3 of the Bhagavad Gita, actionlessness cannot be attained by mere inaction. One who forsakes work in the name of divine aloofness from activity cannot reach perfection. No one can remain actionless for even a moment. All are compelled by nature, whether willingly or unwillingly, to be active, driven by the gunas, the three qualities of nature. So we have to act. We're compelled by the gunas to act. So how do we overcome the force of habit, that compulsion to go towards the familiar and the comfortable, for our energy to sort of sag down, and instead keep that energy uplifted? And alertness is the quality that's going to help us with this. If we make it a habit of being alert, of bringing our full, awake attention to everything we do, believe me, that is a real challenge, to be fully present and attentive in everything we do, then the oblivion of tamoguna, the sort of restless, emotional sort of spewing that comes with rajoguna, the sort of instant gratification, all sort of becomes a little less appealing, because if we're really alert and attentive, we realize, you know what, this is not going to bring me lasting happiness. This is not what is going to bring me lasting joy. And thank goodness we have this second current of energy in our lives. As Swami Kriyananda said in our affirmation this morning, this soul's longing for divine fulfillment, for joy, for God. That's what sort of helps impel us to be more alert, to help lift our energy. And as we become more alert, we begin to perceive deeper levels of reality, deeper levels of awareness. And we begin to ask ourselves, what is this all about? What's trying to happen here? What's the lesson for me here? And as we begin to ask those questions, and as we begin to sort of tune in more deeply, we can get some inner guidance on that. That can be absolutely essential as we face our challenges. Yogananda used to like telling stories to share his the points that to get across the points he was trying to make. And so I'm going to share one of his stories now. This is a story about two frogs. A big frog, a big frog, and a little frog. And they were hopping around, and both happened to hop and fall into a pail of milk that had very steep and slippery sides. And they swam and just could not figure out they couldn't get enough traction to actually jump out of this pail of milk. And finally, after a couple of hours, the big frog was just like, "Brother little frog, I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore." And he just fell to the bottom of the milk pail and died. And the little frog thought, I'm not ready to die yet. This is not how I wanted to go. So he started paddling even harder, trying to get his way up out of this pail of milk. And a few hours later, he was really starting to tire again, but he thought about Big Frog, And then he was just intoxicated with determination, and he just kept on paddling because he was not ready to go yet. And after some hours, when he felt just almost paralyzed with fatigue and he couldn't paddle anymore, he suddenly felt a little lump under his leg. What this frog had done is with all of his paddling, he had managed to churn the milk into butter. And so he was able to get enough of a foothold that he could hop up on top of that and then hop up out of the pail of milk. And Master says that the moral of the story is that we are all in the slippery milk pail of life, trying to get free from our troubles, like these two frogs. And many people give up like the big frog. But if we persevere, if we keep our attention focused one-pointedly, I'll say if we put out enough energy, as this little frog did, then we can eventually reach our goal. Now, I said in the beginning that Swami gave us 3 keys. We've talked about energy, we've talked about alertness. The other key that he gives in this reading, he talks about how Jesus was tempted in the wilderness and how he overcame that by clinging determinedly to God. And if you look at the lives not only of Jesus, but of all the saints, it was their deep, unwavering devotion to God that helped carry them through their trials. Yogananda, too, was not without challenges in his life. He spent much of the 20s traveling, crisscrossing the United States, visiting cities all around the country. And his boyhood friend, dear Ananda, was left to help run Mount Washington in his absence. And dear Ananda turned on him, actually sued him. And, even more challenging, Yogananda was thrown out of, I believe it was Miami, by a corrupt mayor. And there were a lot of false stories circulating in the news about him. And Yogananda came back to Mount Washington and then actually went to Mexico for a time to just be with God and ask God, what do you want me to do? How should I move forward with this? And we have to make God the pole star of our lives. And if we do that, our energy and our alertness will more naturally rise to that. And if we're not firmly anchored in the divine, then it's much easier for our sadhana and our spiritual practices to start to sag. And sometimes during tests they sag because we just get distracted, or we find it hard to focus, and we think that, I'm not doing this right, or I'm not going to get any benefit from this anyway, so why should I even bother? And sometimes our practices sag because we're actually having to put out a lot of energy in the world, and we don't have as much time. But even if it's the latter, we need to constantly keep our awareness and our attention turned toward God, even as we're going through our daily lives. In the Essence of Self-Realization, Yogananda says, be ever busy for God. When you are not meditating, be active for Him. And when meditating, offer your mind up to Him in the same spirit of service, with keen, alert attention. Keep the mind ever busy with God and with doing good for others. An idle mind is the workshop of the devil. The song we sang at the beginning of service, I will always think of thee. Though my path lead me over desert sands, though it take me through bitter storms, in my heart, Lord, ever so silently, I will always think of thee. I was thinking about this morning in my meditation. There were some words from another one of the songs that we sing, Keep Calling Him, that came to me. Even when there's no reply, never let your longing die. Remain persistent, undepressed, through dark and seeming silence. If in the midst of life, disease, and death you play the dancer and keep calling Him, you will receive His answer. And that's a promise to each one of us. So I could go on and on. There's all kinds of actually really good qualities that are helpful for us in meeting our tests. Courage, calmness, acceptance, willingness, attunement, love, joy, you name it. But my experience with tests is that sometimes what my ego thinks I should be doing is actually spiritually not what I should be doing. So yes, I may need to be courageous, but in what way? How does that manifest dharmically in the particular situation I'm in? Or maybe I need to accept the situation, but maybe dharmically I need to stand up for myself in a particular way. These more subtle points of how we meet our tests, it's easy to sort of get lost in the weeds in our heads around these ideas. They're very much what each of us needs to do is very much tied up with our own karmas. And we only get answers to those questions by deeply tuning in for inner guidance, by asking Divine Mother, help me, show me, guide me, walk with me every step of the way. Guide my every thought, word, and deed. Help me to know what to do. And if we can carry on that dialogue and hold Divine Mother close, cling to her as we go through our tests and trials, then we'll get the answers for how to deal with all the other stuff as we need to deal with them. Master also said, many of us wear bangles as a kind of sort of protective amulet. Master said, devotion is the greatest bangle, meaning devotion is the greatest protection in our trials. Several years ago, I went through a very challenging period in my life of about 3 years where I was dealing with a lot of tests on multiple levels. And as I look back in retrospect on the other side of that now, there are really sort of two things that stand out to me. Well, I'll say three. One was that I was putting out a lot of energy on sort of the material plane to try to change situations and circumstances, but a lot of energy into my spiritual life. And it really was a catalyst for me in deepening my own inner connection with God. The other thing that I did not anticipate, but makes complete sense to me now in retrospect, is that having gone through those tests on the other side, there's so much more joy, so much more, there's greater inner strength, there's greater wisdom and understanding, there's greater love and appreciation for others. And these things are not mine per se, they're Divine Mother's, but I'm able to experience them more now because in the process of going through these tests, those pieces of me that were blocking her from flowing through me, some of those have been transformed and removed and shifted so that a little bit more of that flow can come through me. And this is what we all experience. And as Swami said, that the reward of this greater alertness is that we experience more joy in our lives. And don't get me wrong, I have a long ways to go still, but it's a wonderful experience and insight into what lies ahead as we continue to face and overcome the challenges and tests in our lives. And I understand a little bit better now how the saints, Devaki shared Friday night some beautiful stories about St. Francis and St. Clare, and how they and others, they lived these lives with, in some ways, so very little on the material plane and so much suffering and trials. And yet they were just filled with this inner beatitude and joy. And I get it now. As it says in the Festival of Light, for us, where suffering and sorrow in the past were the coin of man's redemption, for us now the payment has been exchanged for calm acceptance and joy. I'd like to end this morning with a short reading. These are some words that Yogananda wrote to a devotee. And I have read these words to myself many times over the years when I've gone through challenging times, and they have really given me hope and encouragement and renewed my faith. So I'm going to invite you all to close your eyes and focus deeply at the point between the eyebrows and feel as I'm reading this, that this is Yogananda saying this to you. You must never lose courage. Divine Mother sent me to pilot you out of the clouds of your mind. Everybody's difficulty is different, and he or she has to win that test of karma and Divine Mother. Overcome all by constant inward calling on God and utmost devotion in words, thought, action, and obedience to Guru. Your troubles I do not mind. I will never give up my job about you. It is better to conquer evil and not go on living with it forever. Never for a moment identify yourself with momentary flashes of error. Have no fear. Even when I'm gone and no longer visible to your eyes, you will never be alone. I may not scold you then, but I shall ever be with you, and through Divine Mother, guard you from all harm, and will constantly whisper to you guidance through your loving self. So do not make life discouraged and tired, but be ever interested in doing for Divine Mother, no matter if wars, sickness, and death dance around you. That is the secret of victory over delusion and all troubles. Be cut to pieces, but never give up. Be a divine leech. Suck at the blood of wisdom, even though torn to bits. A smooth life is not a victorious one, and I will give you lots of good karma so you will get through. I will not only ever forgive you, but ever lift you up no matter how many times you fall. Keep unceasingly trying to conquer, that not only I invisibly help you, but visibly through many here. Divine Mother will help you to win through your own efforts and the blessings of the great gurus. I am not building a mansion for you or giving you riches that will perish, but I am making an imperishable home with all riches for you in my Divine Mother's mansion. God bless you.